While working on the 9th edition of Kansky's Clinical Ophthalmology, I noticed that amongst the scans and fundus photographs, there featured intricate paintings of the back of the eye. The majority of these illustrations featured a single name, Tarrant, in the bottom-hand corner of each painting. As I later found out, this name is widely known throughout ophthalmology, and the work is highly revered. This presentation sets out to find out more about Tarrant and the artist who explored these unknown worlds. Our story starts at King's College Hospital in London, with the birth of Terence R. Tarrant on the 7th of January in 1930. Tarrant was brought up in Newington Causeway, which is close to the Elephant and Castle. His father worked as a station master for the London Underground, and he was also a gifted artist who in his spare time would produce signage for local shops and businesses, generating extra income for the family. It was evident at an early age that Tarrant had inherited his father's artistic abilities. He also had an interest in microscopes and optics, and would construct rudimentary telescopes out of cardboard. He was evacuated to the countryside twice during the Blitz, eventually leaving school aged 14 with the hope of finding a job where he could utilize his artistic talents. Accompanied by his father, Tarrant visited the Labour Exchange, which was the forerunner of the modern job centre. He was interested in creating illustrations for the Metal Box Company, as hand-painted tins were highly popular at this time and many homes had large collections. After unsuccessfully searching for a job that could use his artistic talents, he focused his attention on his other interest, which was optics. He returned with his father to the Labour Exchange and found a vacancy at Theodore Hamlin, an affluent optician and optical instrument maker. Henry Thomas Hamlin founded Theodore Hamlin, whose patrons included the royal family. Tarrant successfully applied as an optical assistant in Hamlin's factory. One lunchtime, he sustained a serious injury to his back, and the following day Tarrant was unable to stand, and a visiting physician suspected he might have polio, and he was admitted to hospital. During his stay, his father brought him art materials where he occupied his time making copies of drawings from natural history books, and after 2 weeks he was discharged from hospital with a clean bill of health. The drawings he made while convalescing were brought to the attention of the managing director at Theodore Hamlin. On the strength of his artwork, Tarrant was offered an apprenticeship as an ophthalmic draftsman for £2 a week. He was thrilled, as this would combine both drawing and optics. He traded his khaki overcoat he wore in the factory for a white overcoat that was worn by the draftsman. Tarrant described this as moving up in the world, beginning a career that spans 46 years as an ophthalmic artist. But how did this profession start? To understand Tarrant's new role, we need to look at why paintings of the eye were required and the history of this unusual art movement. This early example, illustrating ophthalmological surgical treatments and techniques, was published in 1583. The work contains a total of 92 woodcuts depicting eye disorders, including diseases of the eye caused by witchcraft, as well as examples of surgical techniques and treatments. This book also includes a fold-out section showing anatomical diagrams of the structure of the eye, including the retina. Another example illustrating conditions of the external eye is a 1675 compendium of medicines and surgery compiled for the use of the House of the Franciscan Order. This book contains over 100 pages that are devoted to ophthalmology, with approximately 60 colour illustrations. This book also contains a fold-out section showing the inside of the eye, and retinal disorders remained a mystery as they could not be visualized, with dissection being the only way to examine the internal structures. This all changed, however, in 1850, with the invention of the ophthalmoscope by Hermann von Helmholtz. Helmholtz revolutionized the field of ophthalmology, giving surgeons the ability to examine the inside of a living human eye. When Albrecht von Graf first examined the eye using Helmholtz's ophthalmoscope, he exclaimed, "Helmholtz has discovered for us a new world." The early explorers of this new world documented the retinal landscapes, unlocking its secrets equipped with only a paintbrush and an ophthalmoscope. The first published painting of a retina from a living subject featured in a medical school dissertation in 1853. Van Dyck came from an artistic family and was a notable painter, and here we can see one of his works that was recently sold at Christie's. After Van Dyck published his paper, paintings of the retina started to be included alongside the clinical descriptions in ophthalmology textbooks and atlases. The following publications chart the evolution of this art form and how these paintings became an essential requirement, while also examining the development of ophthalmic photography. One of the earliest examples, which was recently brought to my attention and is included in the Institute of Ophthalmology's vast collection, is Edward von Jaeger's 1855 publication, Contributions to the Pathology of the Eye. This textbook was published in 2 volumes, and the accompanying atlas features 21 examples of Jaeger's paintings. 8 years later, Richard Liebrich published his colour ophthalmic atlas. Liebrich was an incredibly skilled artist, and his atlas features 57 paintings of the retina. Edward von Jaeger's atlas contained 29 chromolithographed plates made directly from his original paintings, which are now housed at the University of Pennsylvania. The author himself explains in the foreword how much effort was put into the depictions. The precision with which I proceeded in producing the images can be seen from the fact that in each individual case I first made a draft of the upright and inverted mirror image in order to become aware of individual errors through the resulting differences, and that I largely needed 20 to 30, even 40 to 50 or more sessions of 2 to 3 hours or more for each individual case just to produce the hand drawing on which the image is based. 33 years after the first painting of a retina was published, the first photograph of a living human retina featured in the Philadelphia Photographer. Jackman and Webster's 2.5-minute exposure resulted in an image with a prominent corneal reflex with a faintly visible optic disc. If we compare a painting from the same year, it illustrates their differences in quality and clinical usefulness, and how far photography needed to evolve to match the skills of the artist. Retinal paintings started to feature regularly in journals accompanying the surgeon's descriptions. In 1888, one artist's work first appeared who would subsequently become a leader in this field. Arthur Head, whose illustrations we can see here, became prolific, and his paintings would feature in textbooks and atlases for the next 30 years. Arthur Head was a graduate from the Slade School of Art and produced many watercolour and oil landscapes. It was quite common for artists to be commissioned to produce retinal paintings, especially if the painters are financially struggling. Tinus de Jong, who later became a renowned artist, also experienced financial difficulty during the early part of his career. He was employed to produce ophthalmic paintings by David James Wood, the first ophthalmologist and first medical specialist in South Africa. Head continued to work as a retinal artist and enjoyed the regular income, collaborating with many ophthalmologists on atlases and books, culminating in Lindsay Johnson's 1901 publication. Head's work is credited in the preface. I was fortunate enough to obtain the assistance of that well-known artist and excellent draftsman, Mr. A. W. Head. It is entirely due to his talents that I have been able to obtain a great number of excellent and faithful drawings of the fundus oculi of most of the mammals to be found in the menageries and zoological gardens of Europe. This publication features 50 colour retinal paintings of animals ranging from the common guinea pig to an African elephant. Head's work was becoming known outside of ophthalmology, and he was interviewed for a magazine in 1901. In an article by Marcus Woodward, it details Head's account of working on Lindsay Johnson's book. The image at the top illustrates Head's encounter with a puma who took umbrage to being examined. Head was unaware at the time that this puma had been trained to box by a local circus, and was forced to defend himself armed only with an ophthalmoscope and paintbrush. In a letter in the archives at the Institute of Ophthalmology, it describes how a series of animal encounters, like the boxing puma, had a profound effect on Head's mental health, and it paints a different picture than Woodward's article. The letter explains how after a skirmish while examining a tiger left him in a highly nervous state from which he never fully recovered. And after this experience, he spent much of his time in his own company, not wanting to mix with anyone. Otto Hab's 1904 publication illustrates how pathology was being represented in early medical textbooks. The visual language of how we present retinal images is very different from today. If we look at these two retinal paintings on the right in more detail, we can see that the left eye is presented on the left and the right is on the right. This format was common and featured in many textbooks of this era. And I'm not sure if you noticed earlier that Liebrecht's paintings have an unusual appearance. If we take a closer look, focusing on the hemorrhage, we can see that it's inverted. This was due to Liebrecht using a camera obscura, which led to his paintings being created and printed upside down. The development of photography continued, with the first retinal photographic atlas being completed in 1907. This publication contained 58 black and white photographs of the retina. The photographs that feature in this atlas were taken on a car-sized camera that was so expensive only one was ever built. And the quality of these photographs are sufficient to establish a diagnosis and give a clear view of the back of the eye thanks to dimmer overcoming the corneal reflex that plagued early photographers. Arthur Head continued to work with Lindsay Johnson, producing the Pocket Atlas in 1911. Head was considered the greatest expert in ophthalmic paintings of this era. Head was also the first artist whose name featured alongside the authors, signifying the importance of his contribution. He also produced an ophthalmic note and drawing book which accompanied this publication. This book was produced to assist the user in creating their own ophthalmic drawings, by supplying a handy template for making preliminary sketches while examining the patient. In 1922, the ophthalmic drawing department was opened at Hamlin's under the supervision of Arthur Head. Hamlin's created this book, which was used to advertise the department and explain the importance of documenting the appearance of the retina. It covers how each artist is trained to produce work following a protocol set out by Head. This made it impossible to recognize a painting from a single artist's style. Hamlin's also held a vast collection of retinal paintings that local surgeons used for teaching, reference, and for publication. 8 years after Head set up the draftsman department at Hamlin's, and the same year that Terry Tarrant was born, Arthur Bedell published his photographic atlas. Bedell utilized the Zeiss Nordenson camera. This was the most popular camera from this time. Bedell's photographs offer a detailed and clear view of the retina. However, the size of the printed image makes it difficult to examine the pathology closely. 4 years later, Wilmer's atlas chose to utilize the skills of one of the leading ophthalmic artists in America over the emerging photographic technology. Wilmer's atlas contained 100 color plates, all of which were reproduced from paintings made by Annette Burgess. Burgess became the first ophthalmic illustrator for the Wilmer Eye Institute, a position that she held for the next 35 years. When comparing Bedell's photographs and Burgess's paintings, which both show retinal detachments, the most apparent difference is how striking Burgess's work is compared to the photographs. Although the photographs could be deemed to be more accurate, the colour paintings give the publication a greater visual appeal. We can hear firsthand how these intricate paintings were created from a clip in the archives of the Johns Hopkins University.
Your old television set, Dumont.
WABD Dumont in New York.
The human eye is one of the most delicate mechanisms in our bodies. The muscles in our eyes are so skillfully engineered, so delicately balanced, that both eyes work in a beautifully synchronized motion. The eye muscles act together so that both eyes can turn to the left, to the right, look up, and look down. But what mechanism is there in the eye which acts to allow us to see? To explain this, we find our first example of the work of the medical illustrator. Trained as artist and anatomist, a medical illustrator was able to prepare this diagrammatic section of an eye. This is a horizontal section of the eye. Let's look at it part by part. This is the cornea, which is transparent like a watch crystal. Here is the iris. The opening between the two sections of the iris is the pupil of the eye. Behind the iris is the lens. The retina lines the inner portion of the eyeball between these points. The retina corresponds to film in a camera. Light is reflected from an object, here penetrates the cornea, passes through the pupil, through the lens, on through a gelatin-like substance, and falls on the retina. Here the visual image is transmitted by the nerve fibers in the retina through the optic nerve to the brain. In spite of the power of the human eye, it does fail us sometimes. Things will happen to the eye. In this case, your doctor sends you to an ophthalmologist for examination. The eye doctor may wish to have a visual record of the affected eye, and he'll call in his medical illustrator. The medical illustrator will examine your eye with an apparatus like this. This is called a slit lamp, a lamp and optical system which allows the medical illustrator to study your iris and cornea. You would sit down on the far side of the slit lamp apparatus and drop your chin on a chin rest in order to hold your head firm and steady so that the illustrator can sketch what she sees in your iris or cornea. Mrs. Annette Burgess, medical illustrator for the Wilmer Eye Institute of the Johns Hopkins Hospital, is focusing her magnifying lenses on the cornea of the patient's eye. And this is what she sees. Here we see the cornea and iris of the eye. This area here is the normal cornea, like a watch crystal. It is perfectly transparent. Underlying the transparent cornea, the normal iris tissue is seen. Now notice this region. The cornea is hazy. Notice the small white portions. Mrs. Burgess will tell us about these in a moment. Moving her microscopic lens back and forth across the iris of the patient's eye, Mrs. Burgess is able to see even the tiniest particle of the eye. She is able to see any abnormality which may exist in the eye. As she recognizes the damaged portions of the eye, she makes quick sketches to record the damage. Let's watch as she works. Working for hours with fine and sure strokes of pencil, pen, and brush, Mrs. Burgess finally finishes the drawing, which is now ready for use by the doctor. We cannot listen as the doctor discusses this drawing, but we can ask Mrs. Burgess to tell us about it.
The upper area of the cornea is clear and transparent, and the iris is normal. In this lower region, the cornea has become very hazy and has the appearance of ground glass. There are opacities, these white spots, and also growing on the anterior surface of these small, twisted little bits of tissue that look like Christmas balls. They're movable with the eye, and they're very painful.
Mrs. Burgess has in her hand another object used by artist and doctor. You have all seen it. It is an ophthalmoscope with which a doctor examines the retina of the eye. The medical artist employs the same instrument as she looks at the retina of an eye in preparation for making a drawing of that retina.
You look up, please. Look down. To your right. To your left. Straight into the light. I would like to show you this. The optic nerve is hazy, not clearly defined as it is in the normal. The retina has become detached in this entire area. There's fluid beneath it that gives it this wavy appearance, and the blood vessels follow along, indicate the wave. The veins are large and engorged, quite tortuous. The arteries are also tortuous. There's a bit of pressure where they cross the veins. This area, the macula, is still fairly normal, so the patient has some vision.
This drawing of the retina of an eye prepared by Mrs. Burgess is used in teaching students to illustrate a rare eye condition, an inflammatory detachment of the retina. Here is another drawing of the retina of a patient in a very advanced stage of diabetes. These spots show small hemorrhage. Here are changes in size and dissection of blood vessels. This painting is one of a series which records each stage in the development of the disease and is therefore important to medical knowledge.
10 years after Wilmer's Atlas was published, Tarrant's story as an ophthalmic artist starts. He was offered the draftsman job in 1944 after his drawings were noticed by the managing director. Tarrant was taught by Tom Hooper, who was the only remaining artist from the original 7 draftsmen employed and trained by Arthur Head. Tarrant's aptitude in drawing and previous interest in optics allowed him to start seeing patients and producing paintings after just 6 months training. Tarrant regularly visited the Wallace collection during his lunch breaks to study the paintings. He was particularly interested in the collection of miniaturists, which the Wallace collection was famous for. Tarrant collected postcards from the museum shop and made copies following the miniaturist techniques. And if we take a closer look at this self-portrait by Jean-Baptiste Isabey, we can see how the painting is made up of small dots, a technique known as stippling. And as we will hear later, Tarrant used a similar technique in his paintings. However, instead of using dabs and spots, Tarrant would paint small marks, building up the layers with the vessels and the pathology being added last. This stippling technique was also evident in Head's paintings, with a series of small dots breaking up the unified colour background. Tarrant continued to produce paintings for Theodore Hamlin until he was called up for national service at the age of 18. Tarrant reported to the Royal Army Medical Corps at Crookham Barracks. After 6 weeks basic first aid training, the squadron was sent abroad, but somehow a senior medical officer was notified of Tarrant's artistic abilities. It was decided that he would be better placed to work at the eye department at the Queen Alexandra's Military Hospital at Millbank. Towards the end of his national service, Tarrant was told about an upcoming vacancy at the Institute of Ophthalmology. This position of retinal artist had been created because of the new medical illustration department that was being set up by Peter Hansel on the request of Sir Duke Elder. Hansel is credited for establishing the first department of medical photography and illustration in the United Kingdom at the Westminster Hospital Medical School. He was a pioneer in medical photography and audio-visual media. Hansel was also at the forefront of the development of ophthalmic photography, which was still in its experimental phase. He was the founding chairman of the Institute of Medical and Biological Illustration, which is now known as the Institute of Medical Illustrators. Tarrant applied for the job at the Institute of Ophthalmology with another applicant, Tom Hooper, who was his previous tutor at Hamlin's. Hansel sent Tarrant's portfolio off to Gabriel Donald, whose paintings we can see here, to get his advice. On the strength of Tarrant's work, Donald recommended him for the job, and Tarrant accepted the position, being paid £330 a year. Tarrant worked in a room adjacent to Duke Elder's office at the Institute and produced paintings, illustrations and diagrams for the publication System of Ophthalmology. In the acknowledgement it reads, "In preparing the illustrations I have had the willing cooperation of Dr. Peter Hansel and the Department of Medical Illustration of the Institute of Ophthalmology, the assistance of which, particularly that of Mr. T.R. Tarrant, the medical artist, has been invaluable." Tarrant was establishing himself as one of the leaders in this field, and his paintings started to feature in many ophthalmic textbooks. He was now able to sign his work, something that he was previously unable to do during his time at Theodore Hamlin, as the artists were required to put a Hamlin stamp on the paintings. The ability to sign his artwork raised his profile and associated his name with the paintings. This subsequently led to a job offer from an ophthalmic department in America, which, after much deliberation, Tarrant turned down, opting to stay at the Institute on a somewhat improved wage. Camera technology continued to evolve, and in 1955 the Zeiss-Littmann retinal camera replaced the Nordenson, and this ushered in a new era of retinal photography. The Littmann camera became the workhorse for the increasing number of ophthalmic photography departments. Other manufacturers started to develop cameras, and in a paper by Dong Wong, it lists the 9 cameras that were commercially available in 1967. This increased to 20 cameras by 1976. The availability of this technology had a direct effect on the demand for Tarrant's retinal paintings, as most hospitals now had dedicated ophthalmic photography departments. However, cameras of this era had a limited 30-degree view, and peripheral photography was challenging. It was possible for Tarrant to show the whole of the retina, which was preferable for teaching and for publication, as illustrated in these 2 examples. His paintings of retinal tears and detachments illustrate the pathology better than any camera from this era. This could also be said of the latest camera technology. If we compare a wide-field photograph taken on the Optomap against a painting of the same condition, we can see the difference in colour and physical obstacles. In this case, the false colour eyelashes and lids, which are the source of much frustration when using this device. The artist selects what to include in the painting, whereas the camera is unbiased and records what's in the frame. Ophthalmic paintings can often better represent abnormal conditions when compared to photography because of the artist's ability to clean up the image. The imperfections of photography have been generally accepted due to the convenience of the acquisition of instantaneous results. Tarrant started at the Institute in 1950 and over the next 35 years produced thousands of paintings of the anterior and posterior segments of the eye. Here are just a handful of examples from the collection at the Institute of Ophthalmology, with Tarrant explaining how he created these masterpieces.
Well, the technical side of it was that I started off with a card, and we worked on, obviously these were standard size 10 by 8. So I'd buy the appropriate quality cartridge paper, and I'd get stocks of card in, and then dry mount the cartridge paper onto the card. Okay, that's the first thing. So we had, had the dry mounting press and everything in the institute, didn't we, for putting photographs onto the card. And then I would, yes, I'd draw a circle in pencil if it was a retinal picture like that, of the whatever size I wanted. I would then, with India ink, I'd draw with a compass a thin line, thinner than that. Okay, India ink, okay, so that would dry. I get a sheet of thinner paper, cut the hole out, and then just ordinary masking tape, low tack. I'd just simply tape it across and then use a hospital scalpel to go round above the black line I'd made earlier, peel off the inside of it. So I'd end up with an exposed area with the rest of it covered. And that will be pressed down onto the India ink so that the watercolour wash I was going to put on wouldn't get underneath it. Okay, so it had to be firm. So then I'd get to work and start putting my first washes on. If it was a very light area, I'd leave it light. You could in those days use a sort of a gum, an artistic type gum that you could actually put on the paper if you wanted to. But I used to just usually draw very faint pencil lines and then wash up to that. And then simply a question of working it up from that by a sort of stippling method, really. Do you know miniaturists? Yeah. If you look closely at a miniature, you'll find it's a stippled technique they use, tiny spots. Yeah. It's almost like that, only they're not so much spots as tiny little marks. Yeah. So what you're doing is with very tiny sable brushes and watercolour, you're building up, say, an edge to the optic disc gradually by doing that, and then gradually colouring in the rest. And then with the basic red colour that I would have put on for the retinal picture, which would be a sort of perhaps a scarlet vermilion colour, Winsor & Newton colour or something of that sort, I'd put that wash on, it would dry, and then I would put on the... I always found, look at some of the old retinal pictures, that they looked dead because there was no background detail. But one of the things I like to do is to get the choroidal pattern in, to make it come alive. And you also, with retinal detachment pictures of that sort, you could see by the changes of colour, obviously with the detachment, you know, how things have changed from grey to the colour they should be. Build it up gradually. So it was a question of gradually building up, let one layer dry, and then gradually building up from there. Yeah, and then obviously one of the last things you would do, put on the retinal vessels, work up the disc, the pallor of the disc, cupping, little spots in the middle, I've forgotten, lamina cribrosa, and then put on the retinal veins and arteries, yeah. And the pathology, of course, most important of all.
Towards the start of the 1980s, ophthalmic photography was well established. The Institute was running out of money, and in 1981, to the surprise of Tarrant, the audio-visual department was closed. Tarrant was given early retirement, but was then immediately rehired by Moorfields and relocated to the High Holborn branch. Photography inevitably replaced the last ophthalmic artist, and in 1985, after creating thousands of paintings, Tarrant retired. He continued to work, setting up a drawing board at his home in Dorset, where he received requests for paintings and illustrations. Included in these were the subsequent volumes of Clinical Ophthalmology by Jack Kansky. Tarrant worked with Kansky up to the 4th edition, where retinal photography would prominently feature. These images are from the 2nd edition, which showcases Tarrant work better than any other in the series. Tarrant laid down his paintbrush for the last time in 1990 and retired after 46 years of working as an ophthalmic artist. His paintings and name are recognised both nationally and internationally in ophthalmology, yet when examining his handwritten CV, which is in the archives of the Institute of Ophthalmology and comprises of a single side of an A4 sheet, and given all his achievements throughout his career, it illustrates his humility, something that came across during the interviews that were carried out for this presentation. In 2001, Tarrant was awarded Honorary Fellowship of the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, the highest accolade it can bestow. This is given in recognition to individuals who have made a significant contribution to ophthalmology. For the purpose of this presentation, Terry Tarrant was interviewed on many occasions. He was always very enthusiastic, speaking about his work and telling stories from his past with such clarity it was easy to forget his age. Terry was looking forward to reading the paper about his life, which recently featured in Eye, and also watching this presentation. But sadly, after a short illness, Terry passed away on the 4th of July, 2023. As for his legacy, the name Tarrant will still feature in future publications and be kept alive in the diagrams, illustrations, and retinal paintings that feature in its pages. The following paragraph in an ophthalmic atlas from 1898 describes the importance of producing paintings of the retina. Written descriptions of any part are, in all departments of medicine, of doubtful utility, because it is always difficult to explain to another in words what we ourselves see. This applies more particularly perhaps to ophthalmology, for how can we accurately describe the topography of a fundus in words? And when we come to describe the colour, we are met by almost insufferable difficulties. A little more white or red or grey may change the picture in so important a manner that the experienced oculist will recognise serious changes which the beginner may think are normal or of no consequence. It is a good education for the eye to produce a colour drawing of the fundus. It trains us to observe correctly the finest changes in the colour tones, and even if we are poor artists, any attempt is better than none. I hope this presentation and Tarrant's story will inspire you to explore these once unknown worlds and follow in the footsteps of the greatest retinal artist. I would like to thank the following people for their help in researching this project: Richard Keeler, Wendy Franks, the team at the Boots Archives and the Wellcome Collection, the Wallace Collection and the Johns Hopkins University for use of the clip, and of course, Terry Tarrant. If you would like to learn more about this subject, please scan in the QR code, which will take you to the article this presentation was based on.